Hey, this is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and this is our chart lesson for today. It's Wednesday, October the 24th, and what we're looking at is a trading range here. However, there was this channel within the trading range, and prices did not, they didn't really, you can clearly see that channel was holding prices, but prices were consistently getting out of that. And this right here this is news right here. This was news time. So if you notice this news right here, or if you were trading during the news, you'd realize that that's one reason probably why we overshot this again here. The market got it really got emotional, and because of the FOMC, and that's one of the biggest news, and that's really not a big move for FOMC news, but there's been no real surprises lately, so there's been no crazy moves around the FOMC news like there have been. However, you can see that the market did react very, very strongly around the news time there. But we had the really strong support was down here between 1406 and maybe 1408, and you can see every time we got within that range, prices bounced until we finally worked through it right here. And that's why we got all this overlap. Prices were really struggling to get through there. But one of your clues is, look how every one of these highs is a lower high, or at least an equal high. And if you look at the closes, all the closes are definitely lower each time. Well, that's a clue that they're working lower. The buyers are getting weaker each time, and the sellers are starting to gain momentum, and that's a clue that we're eventually going to break through. The question mark is when, and here's your breakout pullback short right here. So there really was a short right there. I didn't mark it. I guess I probably should, because that's a very legitimate trade right there. I was done by this time, and you know how I feel. Most of you, if you've been following me, you know how I feel about trading in the afternoon. You're best to get your trading out of the way, because the afternoon is mostly professionals, and the morning hours are when you have your weaker traders and your retail traders and so forth. By the time you get in the afternoon, you're trading against mostly professionals, and it gets tougher. And the price action's all still there. It all still works, but it does tend to get harder in the afternoon. So I prefer to trade in the morning, and you really should have treated this, even if you didn't find the trend channel, which was a little difficult to find, I'll be honest with you. I didn't see it until this bounce right here, and then I kind of noticed that we were trading, so I drew that line. And of course, if you drew this line up here right off the first two swings, you'd have had this anyway, but I didn't catch this until, actually I think it was right here is where I caught this when we bounced off this low. I kind of noticed that, and I dropped that line in there, and then I came up here, and it matched perfect up here. And of course, that's why I try to tell you, it's usually off the first couple of swings, and there's your high of the overnight. And if you drew that, it was right there. And if you copy that line and drag it down, you see that's a perfect fit. And so that's how I found those lines, and they were there. So, but you really didn't have to have them at all, as long as you were aware of where the support was coming in and you knew where the resistance was. This was a fairly basic trading day, and you got a double top right here. You got a double top, triple top almost, and of course buying the lows is always, this actually should have been red right here, and I'll explain that trade in a minute. But there was also like a temporary trend line right down through here. And so we'll leave that right there as well. And this should have been red. So we might be confused. But let's just start with each trade. Let me back out a little bit where it's easier to see, and we'll go through each trade. But this was right at the open. You got your strong resistance up here. You already got a double top, and this is just really another double top. Second entry short off this new high right here, and this was a great place to go short. This got you short right at the open, the beginning of the day, any runners were easily safe here, and you could have ridden this all the way down as far as you wanted. This was probably a good place to exit right here when we broke below this previous kind of double bottom right here, and we went into all that overlap. That's not a good sign. You know, if you held on though, you could have ridden this all the way down to the lows of today though, easily. So it just depends on how you want to manage your trades and so forth. But this was an excellent entry, and these are the ones you got to catch. And your best entries on a range day like this are going to be the entries that happen at the lows and the highs. And the fact that we never could get back up here today was another clue that we might end up going lower before the day was over. And let me show you this too. I failed to show you this. This is generally what happens. You have one leg down, and then you go into a trading range like this at a lower level. Well, the odds are you're going to make a measured move out the other side eventually. And if you, let's just measure that and see, there's your first leg down, and then there's your second leg. And we overshot that a little bit, and you can see that right there. But that would have given you a nice place for a target, and you can kind of see where that's where we stopped, but they drove it down a little further later in the afternoon, and then we rallied out of that. And so just something to keep in mind. But this was a great place to enter. Then you had another entry right here, and you probably wouldn't have had this in here yet, and you probably would have actually had this trend line working down through here like so. And so that's a second entry. Even though this made a new low, this is still good enough to be a second entry short. But you got this trap, you got this negative bar, and we broke higher and then turned back down. So right there is a great place to go short. Nice easy short, and even your runners were good for a couple points if you held on to it. And that's your two-legged pullback to the EMA. And now you got this trend line coming down through here, and then you got another two-legged pullback. That little bitty tiny doji right there was probably not a bad trade, but it was better to wait for a better setup, because you got to be thinking we got above there, we may make another leg up. And even though that's two legs up, you actually could have entered right there. And I'm not sure if that trade would have worked. 49.25. No, that would have been a 4-tick failure there, and we would have went higher, and you probably would have got stopped out, and then it turned back down. But going short under a doji, usually those little dojis. I know there's still a lot of confusion by some of you when it's a good time to enter under a doji, and it's usually a bar like that at a strong support or resistance, but usually they work the best at the major highs and the major lows. And there's a lot of overlap right there, so you knew you were going to get some snapback, and you can see a lot of people got fooled. They thought that turned into a breakout pullback long, but it didn't. But you had this little down-sloping trend line. And so the better entry was when we broke out of this congestion right here, because then you know it's going to snap back, and you're probably going to go down and test the low again, and because that's the first break of that little trend right there, and that's exactly what happened. So this was the better entry. If you took this one, depending on how you manage your stop, you could have gotten stopped out, and I probably should have marked that one in green, because a lot of times I would take that trade, but this morning, because we were so close to the lows and we just had this failed break kind of below a double bottom, that was another reason not to take it, because there's a good chance we're going back up to the top from there. So that was my thinking. But once we went into this congestion, you really don't even need that trend line right there. Once you went into that congestion, you know what happens when you break out and you get a failure. It traps everybody. And so there was the place to go short, and that was an easy scalp. And then, of course, look what happened. It did bounce and start heading back to the higher side. And there really weren't any good trades in here until we got up here and made this double top. And that's your major trend line, which, again, even if you didn't have that right there, in case you didn't find that, you still should have had these double tops right across here like so. And so now that's your resistance, and this is all still rangy looking. There's no real strong trends in here. We made, And if you drag it up to those very highs where that trap was right there, and that was another reason to enter that trade. Notice how we touched it twice, and you actually could have gone short right here because there was this little trap right here, and but again, it's usually better to wait because we've been trending up. It's better to wait on a better second entry, and so this was your second entry where we made another double top right there at that same area. We had a double top over here, so that makes it a broader double top, and then boom, nice sell-off right there. What you're looking for, on the way down are reasons to get short, or you're looking for reversal type patterns and a double top at a strong resistance area. This is just a kind of a repeat pattern of this trade right up here. And you've heard me talk about that before. When you see a repeat pattern, you just about have to take them because they're going to work the same because people remember them. And you see that we already had a double top, and then we came back and tested it. So now we got a double top, and we come back and test it, and it fails, and it turns down again. And that was a nice move down. And you had to be thinking we were still going to try to test this low down here too. So there's just a lot of buying in this area, and we bounce out of there quite often. But notice how each low is getting a little bit lower. That's a clue. But then now you come down here, and you get this bounce right off the low from yesterday. But it goes into this congestion. So what you got to do is wait on a trap. But you got to be thinking we're going to bounce because this is kind of a range day. This is a range, this is what I'd quantify as a range day more than I would a trend. And so you got to be looking for the right setup. And there's no setup really right in here because look at all that overlap. But look what happened when prices broke out. They immediately failed and pulled back. And it's too close to these lows to be going low. So you got to be thinking we got to hope for a trap. And when we broke lower here and started moving up, I thought we were going to get the trap and get to go long here, but it didn't happen. We ended up breaking below this one and then coming up and closing. So right there, now you got a failed, there's your new low, your first entry short, your second, you got a failed second entry short at a strong support that reversed. And this bar right here is a tell-all because it broke lower and then closed way up here on its high. And that takes a lot of strong buying to do that. So you got to be thinking, hey, we're going higher. And even though it didn't really just take off, it was a good setup. It met our criteria. It had the trap, and you can see it worked easily. And this is where the news came in. I stayed long here thinking that we were going to break and go back to the high. But here's where I exited my long out from down here on my runners. And let me show you this. There was actually a second entry long here. But look, you had all this overlap before it triggered, so not a good place to enter because there's a good chance you'll get trapped. And so you're better off to wait on the trap. So you got all this overlap. Now here's the trap. It broke higher, and it failed and instantly turned down, and the news happened somewhere right in here, and then it shot on down. So if you were willing to enter around the news, this was a fail. Actually, I think it broke lower before the news came out, and then the news drove it on down real fast. I believe that's how it worked. Actually, no. Well, let me just put the thing and see. Yeah, right in there is when the news came out. Somewhere right in here on these two bars. I can't remember. But I was still long. And so I moved my stop to right here, and I set it up to reverse in case we broke lower, because now you got a first entry long and now a failed second entry long, and that's a trap. And so I just put a reversal in there. I only did one contract because it was news time, and I don't like trading the news. But it was a quick move down here, and I exited right down here at the lows, and it went a little bit lower. But you can't be greedy because you don't know if it's going to go lower. But that was where you wanted to reverse and get long, or get long right there if you didn't mind getting in at the news. Because what happens 9 times out of 10, probably 99% of the time, the news, once you have a big move on news, it's going to take it all back rather quickly and then start over. And that's what happened right here. It took it all right back. So that's a great place to get long. The price action still works during the news. It just moves so quick that it's a lot, you got to be reading it a lot quicker. And that's just on a kind of a rangy type day. That's a new low for the day. And what do? You fade every new low and every new high. So great place to go long. Once you started getting this overlap, probably a good place to exit if you didn't take your target up here near these highs. We pulled down and went higher again. If you did hold any runners, they did survive here, but they would have turned down right here. And this was just a great place to get short, because what is this? This is back up here at the highs again, and you see that you got a little double top right across there, and we broke one or two ticks higher and reverse. So right there's a good short. But if you didn't take that one, notice how prices ticked back up there again and then trapped everybody and then turned down. This was the better entry, because even though it backed up on you, I think you would have already been out before it did. I can't remember if it backed up before it got the 4 ticks or not, but I know I did not get a runner on this trade, so I'm not sure. I think it backed up after it got the 4 ticks, because I do not believe I got a runner on that one. So but anyway, either place you could have entered there or here, and it got a little choppy, but you had to be thinking we're coming back down here to the lows, and that's exactly where you bounced a few times in there, but that's because there's just so much buying going on in here. This was just a really strong buying area all day long, but notice how we finally worked through it, and then you got your breakout pullback short. If you wanted to trade the breakout, that's where you could do it. That was the strong support area all the way across there from you can see that even back into the day before. And there's your breakout pullback short if you wanted to take it, but it's really late in the day, and you know it's questionable if you want to get short. And it would have worked. Nice trade. And you had and the clues were that each pullback was weaker than the one before, so that's a good sign we're going to break through. And notice that once we broke below the new low, there's another new low, and but this wasn't a good one to. You never really got a good setup there on that one, and you had to be thinking we may go lower now that we got through that support area, and we did. We didn't go a whole lot lower, but we did go lower, and you can see it eventually it bounced and came out of there. So but that was pretty much it for the day, and we'll back out of there and give you a overall look at that again. And you can see without those lines there, it's hard to see that channel, but you can look, we're kind of undulating lower there, but if you put these lines on there, then it kind of jumps out at you now that, yeah, there's a nice channel down through there. But either way, you had this range that really worked right across there. When we opened up this morning, the resistance was up here, but it quickly fell lower, and so this was kind of the higher part of most of the range for the day. And you can see from really about 8:40, so 10 minutes into trading, this was kind of the highs of the day right across here, 14.11, and most of the lows are right across there around 14.07 3/4 or so. So we spent the majority of the day right there in that 3-point range. So, but now you can see it. We traded down into the range here, and we traded out of the range here. And there were a couple of failed breaks out the top, a couple of failed breaks out the low, and then we traded on down. And that's pretty typical of even smaller ranges, but that's pretty typical of what happened. So, but I'm going to wrap it up. This is Matt with PriceActionTradingSystem.com. Hope you had a good trading day, and if not, hopefully you have a better one tomorrow. We'll see you next.